Now, I've kind of tipped my toes a little bit into tabletop RPGs. I've been to a couple events to film, and then I've also played a couple of little one-shots, Elsa's Missing and For the Queen, but I haven't really explored the whole world of tabletop games. So to sort of help me, to inform me of what the possibilities are, I've got Brendon here from the Melbourne D&D Adventuring...
Adventurers League, yeah,
Adventurers
you
League.
almost got it.
Almost got it.
No,
Yeah,
totally fine. No, it's a mouthful, but yeah, happy to be here. It's nice to we finally kind of got the time to turn up.
Because you're also one of the key sort of members of 5 Foot Step.
Yeah.
So we really like here.
Yeah, we're a couple seasons into 5 Foot Step, and I've kind of just fallen into content producer role, which is a title that Louis gave me because I just started doing things. So yeah, we do that as well, a little actual play show.
Because I think when people think of tabletop RPGs, I think D&D is the one that comes to the forefront that most people would know, even if they've never played it.
It's got that cultural zeitgeist. Like, if you ask your grandmother if they know Dungeons and Dragons, like that's the one. Like, that, you know, everything is Dungeons and Dragons in the same way that everything's a Nintendo kind of thing. Yeah, like, you know, it's the one that, you know, it's got TV shows. You know, it's been on Stranger Things. It's been you know, video games and things like that. It's in that kind of, you know, mindset. And it's funny because it's a lot of people's first game, but it's definitely not like the easiest introduction into role-playing games for sure. Like, it's 90% of like D&D is rules about combat. Like, it's, you know, it's graph paper plotting like I'm this far from this guy and this spell does exactly this and nothing more, and it's very crunchy for a beginner game, but it's also the kind of quintessential like fantasy role-playing experience where people, you know, you want to be an elf going into a cave fighting a goblin kind of thing. That it's D&D. It's the thing that you expect.
Well, what's interesting is because we had a very brief sort of idea about what we were going to talk about today. And sort of when I was thinking about it is like, well, here's some of the different systems in sort of more of a narrative sense. You've actually broken down into how they play. So you've got...
Yeah, well, there's thousands of games, you know, it's tough. We're definitely not going to be able to cover a lot. There's always going to be ones later where we go, oh, I wish I talked about that. But I think if you kind of group them a little bit into the mechanics and a little bit kind of, or I'm actually kind of going to talk about them a little bit like sequentially in terms of like historical order too. So, you know, I don't know if D&D is arguably the first, but it is certainly, you know, one of the earliest. It's from the 70s, and we're kind of going to like step through a little bit that way.
So that's a D20 system. So you've got D&D, Pathfinder.
Yeah, a lot of kind of similar games like that, D20 Modern, things, you know, that are using that kind of system where you're rolling that 20-sided die, you're adding something to it, maybe you succeed, maybe you fail. That's kind of the core of that system.
So what came after that then?
So not particularly long after that, there are a lot of kind of alternate things. People that want to play something that's a little bit different, and then you start to get things like Call of Cthulhu. So obviously, you know, kind of based on the, you know, H.P. Lovecraft, Cthulhu mythos kind of thing. It's a very different kind of step from the perspective of the kind of fantasy that it is, because you're not playing a hero. You're not playing someone who's like super strong that can overcome challenges. You're playing like Sally from the library who saw something scary and now has to deal with it kind of thing. It's a very different element where maybe you don't survive, maybe you don't end up sane by the end of it. And it's different from a mechanical standpoint too, because you're rolling kind of a D100 thing. You've got like a whole sheet of skills that, you know, half of them you'll never remember that you have. But yeah, it's a little bit like that. There's other games that are kind of mechanically like that from the same kind of producers. Like Pendragon is a game where you play as like knights in King Arthur's court, and you get to do things like, I want to, you know, roll on my love for chivalry, or I want to, you know, focus on how much I really love king and country, and that'll, you know, put me into battle and stuff like that. So, you know, there's a lot of kind of stuff from Chaosium that, you know, is in that kind of vein as well.
So after D20, you've got dice pool and storytelling games.
Yeah, after that you kind of get into like, the early 90s and so forth, and stuff like Vampire the Masquerade, where you're, a little bit more of a kind of a gothic horror. They call themselves, I think, a gothic punk game of personal horror is what Vampire likes to call itself, at least now. And it's a little bit more focused on telling the story, a little bit less about how important the rules are. It's not about I'm 30 feet away from this guy and I can cast these spells. It's a little bit more politically focused, especially the current edition of Vampire. It's kind of set in modern times, and it's about like factions and the tensions between them and things like that. It has a combat system. It's terrible. It functionally works. That's the best thing I can say about it. But it's definitely much more about telling that kind of story. But it is fun mechanically from a dice perspective, because you get to pick up like a handful of dice, and it's very satisfying just to roll like 12 dice at the same time and then count up the little fancy symbols that are on them.
So it's almost like a role-playing Warhammer where you just...
Yeah, yeah, that's it. I want to see how good I am at that.
Because I guess you can already see, only having talked about a couple of them, that there is some, even within the different systems within the like themes, or like the D20, like you have different worlds effectively that they're covering, but you can sort of see the different styles of games. And you can sort of, so is that for you? I know we've still got more to go, but
Yeah.
for you, are you choosing sometimes based on the actual mechanical system, and sometimes based on the sort of vibe and feel of the game, or is it both consideration?
It's a little bit of both. I think that there are so many different ways that you can tell one particular story. If I want to play a game about vampires, I could play anything of like 10 to 15 different, systems, and they all kind of treat it different ways. The other game that's kind of similar that came out recently that I absolutely love is called Eat the Reich, where you play as this team of commandos who are parachuting into Nazi-occupied Paris during kind of an alternate version of history, with the plan of killing Hitler, essentially, and ending World War II. And it is this insane, ultra-violent thing where you're just rolling a bunch of D6s and narrating how you throw Nazis across the square and steal motorbikes and ride them over werewolves and things like that. It's completely nuts and the complete opposite of Vampire, but it is the kind of similar kind of system. And you've got other kind of stories that you can tell, like Tales from the Loop, which is kind of something that we ran as our Christmas special for 5 Foot Step, where you play as kids in an alternate version of the 1980s, where there are robots and all these weird sci-fi things happening. There was an Amazon TV show that was kind of similar to it, but it's actually kind of a little bit more like playing like Stranger Things. You're playing, kind of riding around on bikes, solving mysteries, a little bit Goonies, a little bit E.T. kind of, the parents don't think that you're telling the truth and you've got to solve this mystery yourself.
I think what's interesting talking about this is because coming from board games, there are definitely some lifestyle games where you might play a campaign game that like Gloomhaven, where you're going to be playing it every game session with that group of friends for a year or two, or some of the campaign games, or some like really Root, for example, is a game that, because there's so many different factions, asymmetric, sometimes it's their game. But generally with board games, you can play a bunch of different in the night. And so when I think of tabletop role-playing games, I always thought you kind of almost chose your system, and that was kind of like, oh, this group of friends, we play D&D and we just play D&D. But it sounds like while there is like some changing rules, that you can...
It is a little bit like that if you want to tell like a long story.
Okay, yeah.
That's the kind of reality of it, is that if you want to, certainly like a D&D campaign or whatever, if you want to play through like a whole hardcover story or something, maybe you're playing for like 20 or 30 sessions, and depending on how often you're playing, that might be a year or two, that might be 30 years, depending on how often you actually get together with your friends. But it's there are certainly a lot of games that you can play in one session. Eat the Reich I played front to back in one session. And there are a lot of kind of, actually some of the games probably that we'll talk about now are a little bit more like that. They're not designed to be an epic 3-year trek. They're a little bit, maybe 8 sessions and out kind of thing.
So after we're looking at dice pool and storytelling games, we've got, what is that? Powered by
Powered by
the
the Apocalypse. So it's based on the Apocalypse World game that came out, and a lot of people like. I think this kind of is an important like marking point where a lot of systems went to be a little bit more narratively focused with their mechanics. So rather than the mechanics being about like combat and things like that, there's some stuff built into there where you are informed with the storytelling by the mechanics. So to give you an example, so with something like Monster Hearts, where you're playing like teenagers, they're all angsty, but they're also zombies and werewolves and vampires and things like that. You roll something and you might get like a mixed success. So something good happens and something bad happens, and that pushes the story forward. It doesn't actually matter whether you succeed. What it's telling you is like, well, the bad option happened, or both things kind of happen, and let's talk about what that means. And you also kind of gain this little, string on someone that you can use later to affect them and the story and things like that. It's a little bit more kind of what we roll affects how we tell this story together, and we haven't planned out a whole big world. We'll fill in the gaps as it's important.
Okay. So after we got that, we got Forged in the Dark.
Yeah, so based on the brilliant Blades in the Dark game by John Harper, it's kind of a similar concept from some of those like Powered by the Apocalypse games, but it introduces like a few other elements of like structure that are about storytelling. Like Blades in the Dark, to give you an example, is a game where you play as scoundrels in this city who pull heists. And the game itself is about like planning the heist, executing the heist, how you interact with all these different factions and stuff in that world. But as everyone who's ever played D&D and tried to like, plan something knows, you spend like an hour and a half planning something, it immediately goes wrong. It's a waste of everyone's time and there was no point in doing it. Blades in the Dark works very differently. The planning stage is very minimal, and then you launch directly into it depending on how well you roll. You might roll and actually like, oh, you're in a really good position or you're in a really bad position. And then you kind of work it out from there, and you have things like flashbacks where you go, oh, shit, we've turned up here and there's guards. We need to work out like what we're going to do. Oh, wait, hang on. We thought of this earlier. And you get this little Ocean's 11 flashback where you're like, well, actually, I put something in the coffee earlier on and now these guys are going to fall asleep because we're like, all right, well, let's see if that worked or not. And then you kind of roll back time and you roll and you see whether, depending on how complicated it was, whether or not that was successful. So yeah, a lot of kind of different ways of approaching narrative.
And then finally, we've got diceless games.
Yeah, there's a lot of, obviously like you were talking about, like Alice is Missing. There's a lot of role-playing experiences that aren't, that don't really look like D&D. You've got games like Alice is Missing, which is more card-based. There's a bunch of really good Australian games by a group called Story Brewers out of Sydney who make some, really incredible games that are kind of card-based and stuff, but also that are like letter writing based. There's a game that they're kickstarting at the moment, I think, called like My Late Father's Correspondence, where you find like a bunch of letters from your father and and things like that. It's very, I think it's like a solo kind of letter writing thing. There's a game called Decaying Orbit that was made by a local person, Sydney Icarus, who you play as different elements of a spaceship's artificial intelligence as it is plummeting into a distant sun. And together as a table, you narrate different things that you saw in different rooms of this space station, and together tell a story of what went wrong. This tale maybe of like the hubris of a scientific mission, and eventually you kind of narrate the death of this space station together, which is just an incredibly different role-playing experience than playing a traditional game of D&D.
So I guess what you're basically saying is there is a huge range of not only games but game systems.
Yeah.
But I guess there's probably a point where if you've played a couple of different systems, the hurdles to get to a new system is probably a lot less.
Yeah.
So you couldn't easily do like a one-shot in another system.
Yeah, there's a lot of transferable skills for sure. Like, the core experience is kind of similar, and you can pick up a new system pretty quickly.
So we have talked about a bunch of different games and systems. Can you just give us something, you've talked about something you played recently, but what are some highlights in the last 6 months?
Well, I actually introduced a bunch of my family members, my mum and my sister and my nephew and niece, to playing TTRPGs for the first time, playing Tales from the Loop. I wrote a little adventure that was based in my hometown growing up in Marubna in country Victoria, and I wrote that story, for them in an alternate version of the 1980s, that kind of with little touchstones that they kind of knew from that world, and we kind of played that together, and it was kind of really nice to have kind of ushered them into this world to be their kind of first like role-playing experience. The other thing I'll probably mention is that probably a lot of people that are watching this are maybe more board gamers, and if you want like a soft landing into D&D, if you haven't played D&D before, I think in 2023 they released a game called Bedlam in Neverwinter that I played recently with my wife, who is not a role player and doesn't enjoy it whatsoever, but it is kind of like playing a soft version of D&D. It's like this escape room type thing where you solve puzzles, but they kind of hold your hand and lead you in a little bit to being like, what does your character do in this situation, kind of thing.
Some sneaky role playing put under.
Yeah, just a little bit, of hiding the vegetables in the.
Well, thank you for running us through all these different systems and all these games and introducing us a little bit wider to the wonderful world of tabletop RPGs.